Now on BBC One, the 10 o'clock news with Dermot Murnaghan and Matt Barbette.
Rising inflation and a rampant housing market, the Bank of England moves to apply the brakes. Interest rates rise to their highest level in 5 years. They go up to 5%. We'll be analysing the outlook for the economy and asking if further rises are likely. Also tonight, the terror threat facing the UK, a new assessment from the head of MI5. A thumping at the ballot box and a rethink on Iraq for President Bush.
I'm open to any idea or suggestion that will help us achieve our goals of defeating the terrorists and ensuring that Iraq's democratic government succeeds.
And a whole way of life under threat, the crisis facing Kenya's Turkana people.
Kavina does this 3 times a day, and it works out at walking 6 kilometres a day to get water.
In BBC London News, the Christmas lights go on in Oxford Street, turning off those who think they're bad for the environment. And the photographer awarded for documenting multicultural London.
Good evening. The Bank of England signalled its nervousness about the state of the economy today by pushing up interest rates to 5%. It means the cost of borrowing is at its highest level for 5 years. Anyone with a variable rate mortgage or other borrowings will have to find more money to pay the interest, and this rise may not be the last. Here's our economics editor, Evan Davis.
The 9 people who decide the bank rate, the one that drives the mortgage and saving rates that affect all of us. And for the second time this year, rates are going up. Believe it or not, since the Bank of England was created in 1694, interest rates there have averaged 5.0%. So today we've just reverted to the historic norm. But we've had 5 years of rates below 5%. And as you can see from the graph, a graph which goes back 3 decades, the last 5 years have been pretty special. 5 years of cheap borrowing that came after 9/11 and the dot-com crash. But now inflation has picked up, the borrowing has to slow down. So what effects will these rate rises have? You can trace the impact as it circulates round the economy and start with us, Joe and Jean Public. It gives us more incentive to save, less to borrow and spend. Scott Parrish is a mechanic in Chingford. For him and his wife Natasha, higher rates mean forking out more each month on their variable rate mortgage. An extra 15 or 20 quid for a £100,000 loan.
At the moment, you know, you're trying to save like what you can like for Christmas and that, but now them going up now, like it's really hard.
Christmas is a struggle as it is.
If we cut down at the shops, they'll feel a slightly chillier Christmas, which encourages them to keep prices down. Harrington and Hallworth Jewellers in Wilmslow think some customers may buy chocolates and flowers this year rather than silver.
I think our younger customers will probably feel the pinch a little bit. The property in this area is very expensive and therefore they will most likely have very large mortgages.
If the find it harder, so do their suppliers. In fact, the whole of corporate Britain has to keep its prices down too. Castings company William Cook does heavy metal work for customers in defence. They have their own debts to pay interest on.
Well, obviously an increase in interest rates will increase the charges the banks are placing on the company. So, this increase will be a major burden for us.
Of course, higher costs for manufacturers also mean employers have less money to pay their workers, which takes us back to square one, the effect on the public, who may not get as big a pay rise as they'd thought. All in all, higher rates lead to a squeeze on prices and wages, just what the Bank of England wants. And if this rise doesn't squeeze enough, the city's already braced for another early next year. Evan Davis, BBC News.
And Evan joins me now from the City of London. So Evan, what's your assessment about the likelihood of another rise?
I think it's about 50-50, Dermot. We'll see what happens to inflation over the winter. If fuel prices come down, that'll certainly take the pressure off. But we're in a slightly uncharted territory with these 5% rates. It's been an awfully long time since we've had such low rates for so long. You have to go back to Harold Macmillan as Prime Minister telling us we've never had it so good for such a long period of below 5% rates. And people might have become a bit complacent about it, and they've done a lot of borrowing over the last few years as though they've never had it so good then. And I About 40% of the £1 trillion plus of debt that households are sitting on has been taken out with rates below 5%. And we just don't know how the economy, all those borrowers, will cope with rates that don't start with 3 point something or 4 point something, but with 5 point something. Dermot.
Evan Davis, thank you. The head of MI5 has spelled out what she thinks is the extent of the terrorist threat facing Britain. In a rare personal briefing, Elizabeth Manningham-Buller has said extremists are behind a sustained campaign rather than a series of isolated incidents. Well, our security correspondent Frank Gardner is here. So, Frank, how great a threat has she been describing?
Well, this was the clearest explanation yet that I've ever heard from somebody in such a senior position as to what the nature of the international terrorist threat is here in Britain. And what Dame Eliza Manningham-Buller said today in London was that they are currently working on trying to intercept nearly 30 major terrorist plots involving mass casualties. Some of these are suicidal, some of these just simply designed to kill, some of them directed by Al-Qaeda. In terms of numbers, she talked about having to deal with 200 groups involved in terrorism, in other words, terror cells involving around 1,600 known individuals. And she freely admitted, she